Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 18, Yesterday. The episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. So we'll start this episode with the patients. First patient was a man suffering from an aggressive cancer who had a 1 in 4 chance or 25% chance of surviving his surgery, who recruits Meredith to help him create videos to send to everybody who's ever hurt him or made him feel less than in his life so that he can finally tell them how he really feels about them, as he kept it all inside and so none of them were aware of his true feelings towards them. We then had the second patient, which was a woman who experienced spontaneous orgasms at various points throughout the day, which prevented her from being able to do standard daily activities. And in fact, the reason she was even at the hospital in the first place was that she got one while driving and ended up causing an accident and being brought in. And then the third patient in this episode was a patient who had bony tumors, which the doctors referred to by a long medical term, which they then said Leonidas is the short form for. And basically those bony growths were pressing on the brain, so he was in for surgery. And then Mark, who happens to be a plastic surgeon, because he was in town, decided to offer to try to help with the growths on the face to give him a more average-looking face, but ultimately, unfortunately, that patient died on the table. However, with the parents' permission, Mark does do the surgery on the face post his death so that the parents can see what their child would have otherwise looked at and how he wanted to look after the surgery, but never got the chance to because he passed on first. Having said that, Mark Sloan, who is, of course, Derek's former best friend, who had the affair with Addison, arrives in town to try to win Addison back, and we learn that him and Addison continued on with their affair even after Derek had gone to Seattle, before Addison ultimately decided to leave Mark to go back to Derek, who had then had Meredith, who he left to go back to Addison, and, all the other drama that's occurred since then. We then have Meredith visiting her mother, and while she's visiting her mother in the home, her mother comments on her ongoing affair at the hospital, which lets Meredith know that her mom is basically had an affair. She then, at the end of the episode, goes to visit her father for the first time in 20 years to basically say, her mom had an affair, why didn't you fight for us? He says he tried. He then asks if she needs anything, and she tells him she needs nothing from him before leaving again. Then when she gets back, she speaks briefly with Mark, who has taken a page out of her book and asked Addison to meet him at the bar if she's interested in rekindling their romance, which of course she doesn't go to. She just sits and cries while Derek reads in his bed, and then she goes home, and that is where George comes in to make his big love confession that's been building for all of season 1 and season 2 so far. And she, basically having been in an emotionally vulnerable position, actually then sleeps with him. Then we have Christina, who is found out for keeping her apartment when Burke answers her phone while they're having breakfast in the kitchen, and finds out that the apartment had a minor flood and that was her landlord. And so he spends the episode kind of upset about the fact that she didn't give up her apartment, but at the end of the episode, she does give up the apartment, and they seem to be back on their even footing. And then we had Bailey. We got to see her baby. She's wandering around the hospital because, of course, her husband's still in the hospital from his car accident injury, though he is going to be discharged soon, which is established at the start of the episode. So she's going around with her baby all day. And then lastly, we have Izzy and Alex, who in the last episode had some physical intimacies with each other, despite the fact that they had broken up. And this episode, Izzy is very certain that she is not going to continue being intimate with Alex, but after dealing with the orgasm patient throughout the day, she, at the end of the episode, confirms to George before he goes to Meredith that she, in fact, has given in and she does want to continue to be intimate with Alex. And that is where this episode leaves us. So now that we've been reminded about what happens in the episode, it's now time to rank the episode. And as always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking list. So our mostly objective rank values, I highlighted those I felt applied to the episode, and there were quite a few on both positives and negatives. And of course, we need to start with our single episode supporting character introductions, and these were our patients of the episode. We had Chuck Eaton, who made the hate videos to pretty much everybody he ever knew, getting everything off of his chest before he goes into the surgery, which, if you're superstitious, you could say he kind of cleared out his negativity and his karma, and that's why he managed to be the 1 in 4 who survives. But either way, that was Chuck, and then we had Pamela Calva, who was, of course, the one with the spontaneous orgasms. And then we had Jake Burton, who was the one who had the bony tumors in his face and is the patient who did not survive the episode. And that brings us up to 3 points so far. We then have our supporting relationship development, which is, of course, the knowledge that Mark and Addison continued their affair once Derek had left, and that Mark still has feelings for Addison and asks her to, if she can see that Derek and her aren't going anywhere, and that her and him had something, to meet him at Joe's, which, of course, she doesn't come. And that was 2 points. Then we had our multi-season supporting character introduction, which was Meredith's father, Thatcher Gray. We have heard of him before in many other episodes, but this is the first time that an actor was cast for him, and we actually see him on screen. Then we had the successful emotional impact, which honestly for me was the patient Jake Burton. They let us know that he was a very well-adjusted, very kind person who, you know, understood and accepted the way that people saw him and the way he saw himself, and he just came off as a really sweet and nice person. Therefore, when he died, that obviously was quite sad, but it ultimately wouldn't have probably caused too much of an emotional impact, except then they went the step further with, having the parents allowing him to get the face that he wanted in death, and Mark, Alex, and Christina performing the surgery, and then at the end of the episode, the parents get to come in, and the mom puts her hand on his face and comments on how peaceful he looks, and it's a very touching moment there. So, like, the post-death is where the emotion is, and so it definitely got me, so definitely think it's worth those 3 points. Then we, of course, had our multi-season main character introduction, which was Mark Sloan, who, of course, was Derek's former best friend, who had the affair with Addison, who gets punched out by Derek for flirting with Meredith, who Derek gave up. Then we get a main relationship development between Christina and Burke, where at the end of the episode, she does ultimately decide to give up her apartment. And that brings us now into the negatives. So we've got our negative messaging or behavior, which I felt applied to both Derek punching Mark. One, violence is never justified, so I do not think he should ever have punched Mark. That is dramatic for the show, and it is a drama series, so I understand why they decided to have him punch him. But again, even though Mark definitely was in the wrong and did wrong to Derek, I feel that a yelling match would have been more appropriate because, like I said, violence never is okay, in my opinion. Some people might disagree, but I'd think they'd be the minority, to be honest. And then, of course, the George and Meredith situation. Obviously, George doesn't know that Meredith is in a very vulnerable emotional state when he makes his love declaration, so when she seems receptive, he assumes she is, and so sleeps with her. However, at the same time, on Meredith's part, she knows George. George is her friend. Even in an emotional state, she should have at least considered the ramifications, especially when he's giving an actual love confession, not a proposition for like a one-time thing. I feel like on both sides, it never should have happened, which I think as rewatchers we know is going to be something that does get addressed in the future, but I really think it shouldn't have happened. I feel like he picked a wrong time to make his grand confession because he chose when she was vulnerable, and then she, because she was vulnerable, did something that she never would have otherwise if she wasn't in that vulnerable state because she knows she has no feelings whatsoever for George. And because they are friends, I don't think she ever would have done that if she hadn't been in the state of mind that she was. And likewise for him, again, maybe should have picked his timing better. There were many times when he almost confessed that he didn't. And the very fact that when he made his confession at work, she like didn't listen to him at all should have given him the hints that he needed that she has zero feelings for him whatsoever. But ultimately, I do think it was negative messaging or behavior because it's just a bad situation that should never have happened. So that's also -2. Then we, of course, have the supporting relationship regression or breakups, which was Izzy kind of freezing out Alex in a way. Basically, she was physically intimate with him, made him think he had a chance. Now, this episode, she's saying, nope, not going to happen, but still doing so in a bit of a flirty way by telling him, like, not to look at her with dirty eyes. And then he's like, well, you're looking at me with dirty eyes. And she's like, blah, 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 back and forth, like, basically she's still flirty about it. And then of course by the end of the episode, as we saw, she does ultimately decide to um agree, like, to um be physically intimate with him again, which was +2. um and then of course we also have Addison rejecting Mark by not going to the bar to meet him. We had a weak subplot, which of course was Thatcher. And I mean, it's nice that they showed us that they have cast somebody as Thatcher. Great. Except, like, it was entirely pointless for her to go there. She literally just went there to say, oh, I know about my mom's affair with you. I'm upset you didn't fight for us. I don't need anything from you, and walk away. Like, she could have done that over the phone. Like, it just felt like, I mean, it's nice that they've shown us that they've cast somebody, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't necessarily know that it needed to be there. And it ultimately seemed like a pointless visit because she literally stood on the porch, said like 3 lines, and then left. So completely wasted trip. Um, so yeah, I found that that was a bit of a weak subplot. And then last but not least, we have our main relationship regression or breakup, which of course was the regression that occurred throughout the vast majority of this episode, where Burke finds out that Christina kept her own apartment, considers it a form of lying to him. goes the entire episode kind of seething and stewing about this before he finally, at the end, has his bit of a rant at Christina, who's eating Chinese food in bed. And he's basically like, I am Preston Burke, I am kind, I know how to cook, I clean, I do this, that, the other thing, cardiothoracic surgeon, like I'm amazing, I'm a catch, and you are this slob, this guarded, this, competitive, so on and so forth intern, and yet I love you. Why won't you let me? And then she's like, I got rid of my apartment 20 minutes ago. And then he's like, oh, okay, understood. Leaves the room. And they seem to be back to like a relatively normal place because she has ultimately decided to let him love her. Um, but pretty much the entire episode, he was seething about it. So that to me is a regression. And that brings this episode to, after all of those pluses and minuses, an 8 out of 10 episode. So that now brings us to our season 2 rankings so far in our mostly objective ranking list. And in first we have Make Me Lose Control, Into You Like a Train, Begin the Begin, Tell Me Sweet Little Lies, Break On Through, As We Know It, Deny, 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 Thanks for the Memories, It's the End of the World, Enough is Enough, Something to Talk About, Let It Be, Much Too Much. This episode, Yesterday, comes in 14th. Then we have Bring the Pain, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, Owner of a Lonely Heart, and in last place, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. Now, for my personal ranking on this episode, I covered a lot of what happened in the mostly objective list and the summary, but things that I did like that we got to see Bailey and her baby wandering around. I found it kind of funny how she was bringing her baby to like the to Derek's surgery. She was like, and now they're opening the skull flap. Yes, they are. And like talking to her baby in a baby voice while she's like dictating what Derek's doing on the surgical floor. I thought that was a very Bailey thing to do. It was a great moment in there. Like I said, I really didn't like the George Meredith situation at the end of the episode, but again, I know that they address that in the future because this is a rewatch. So I'm not too upset about it, but also, again, do not like that. I did like that we got to meet Sloane, Mark Sloane, but it was for only one episode so far. Um, and apart from being a part of that meaningful, emotionally impacting moment, it does feel kind of like a flash in the pan. Actually, that brings me to my main sort of semi-issue with this episode, and that is it is a drama series. And I love the drama of the series. I think it is actually really great that there's so much drama because it is very riveting and interesting. However, I do prefer when episodes kind of focus on a big drama. And maybe there's a small drama here or there, but like the main focus of the episode is a singular drama. Because I feel like when it's an episode like this where you have like a ton of tiny little dramas all kind of scattered throughout instead of like one big one, it feels a little overwhelming that there's so much happening, but and at the same time, because nothing's really a focus, it also feels like there isn't a lot happening. So it's this in between of, yes, I'm interested in this drama, but also like I feel like nothing's really happening. We're not really making much progress on any of the dramas, or we're not focusing on any of the dramas. Like Christina and Burke, for example, her finding out about her apartment was a pretty big thing, but it's basically a bit at the beginning, a conversation between Burke and Meredith during a surgery, and a conversation with Christina and Meredith in the locker room, and then it's resolved. And it's like, I would have maybe liked to see more focus, more on their interaction about it. Um, but basically, he does one rant to her, and she's like, oh, well, I already gave it up. And then it's like, oh, okay, we're good now. So, like something like that, very small little dramas, like the Thatcher thing, where it's like 3 lines each in this like meeting, and then she's gone, and it's like, why did you even bother? Like, what was the point of that? Felt kind of pointless. The George Meredith thing, again, very terrible, but just like a little snippet right at the end of the episode very awkward and, well, I don't think anybody ever thought it was going to go anywhere, even when it was first airing the first time. Um, Bailey with her baby, I think that one is fair to be like a small snippet, but that's kind of like what I would have expected. Like, you have your main big drama and then little one there, and like even Mark being there. He gets punched. He and Meredith joke about being dirty mistresses and having things in common. Then he basically butts in on a surgery. Because and I think maybe this could be considered his introduction episode because he did have a bit of a more large role to play, but even then, like his drama was relatively minor. Again, little snippets. It just felt like there was so many things happening all over the place. And then Izzy and Alex just there in the background as well with their drama. And Ellis and Richard in the background with their drama. And it was just like so many little dramas, but no real big drama to actually like focus on. That's why I gave it a 6 out of 10. And so, because I gave it a 6 out of 10, that brings our season 2 ranking so far in the personal ranking to As We Know It, It's the End of the World, Make Me Lose Control, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, Something to Talk About, Into You Like a Train, Break On Through, Deny, 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 Let It Be, Tell Me Sweet Little Lies, Begin the Begin, Thanks for the Memories, Much Too Much. This episode, yesterday, is also 14th on our personal ranking. Then we have Enough is Enough, Bring the Pain, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, and in last we have Owner of a Lonely Heart. And that now brings us to the final segment of the video, which is our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective rankings, Season 1 finished with 77.78%, and Season 2 so far has a score of 140 out of a possible 270. Personal side, we had Season 1 ending with 66.67%, and Season 2 so far is 133 out of 270. With that, we have now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 18 yesterday. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.